I am currently a 24-year-old male living in the Midwest. The occurrence I will be describing in this story happened often in my childhood, all the way up until I left home for college. My parents have lived in the same southeast Illinois home ever since I was born. The bedroom that my baby crib was in is on the ground floor just down the hall from my parents' bedroom. The house is a 2-story log cabin with a basement. I am my parents' first child of 3, so when my little brother was born, I had to move out of my bedroom and into one of the storage rooms upstairs, which my dad cleaned out and made into a bedroom. This was when I was about 5 years old, and I was excited to have a whole room to myself on the second floor. I'm not exactly sure when the first occurrence was, but I am sure it was not long after I moved bedrooms. It did not happen every night, but I remember it very clearly, so it must have been pretty often. I would wake up sometime between 3 and 5 in the morning to the sound of country music being played. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Keep in mind that the way my parents' cabin was built, when you exited my bedroom and went to the left, there was a sort of balcony that overlooked the living room and kitchen. So, after hearing this music, I would get out of bed, go out to the balcony, and look out into the dark rooms to see if my dad were awake and had some music on since he loved country music. He was never awake. When I asked him about it, he said that he never played music if someone was sleeping in the house. So after that first occurrence, I kind of just forgot about it and brushed it off, since it did not really freak me out all that badly. This was only the first time of many this would happen. I would wake up hearing that country music playing very often, but I could never find the source. Usually, once I was back in bed, the music would go away, and it would be quiet, just like any regular house. You might not think that this story is scary, but I have one more detail I have yet to mention. Around the time I started middle school, my parents had my little sister, who now moved into the baby crib room. It was also a chance for me to move bedrooms since my brother also wanted to move. So, I chose to move into the basement bedroom, a strange choice I know, and my brother moved into the second floor bedroom that I moved out of. Fast forward about 12 years. I have graduated college and have my first quote-unquote real job in my career. My brother is getting ready to start college. There was one day that he was visiting me, and we were out talking about funny things that happened in the past, and I brought up the country music I used to hear. When I mentioned the music, my brother turned and looked at me with a face of pure fear. "You heard it too?" I told him about the hundreds of nights I would wake up to the music, and he said that he had the same exact experience in that room. No other family member ever reported this occurrence except me and my brother, who were the only occupants of that bedroom. I do not know if this is a supernatural experience or anything, but I cannot rule it out. My parents were not the first owners of that house, and I do not know anything about the previous owners. If anyone has any explanation, I would love to hear it in the comments. I have a couple of stories to share, all of them involving my family's cabin in Wyoming. So for starters, I need to put this into context. I was born and raised in South Dakota, and if you ever look at a map of it, you will see that it is a great beige, almost rectangle, with a singular circle of green right in the west side of the state. That is where I grew up. Now the west side of South Dakota has some amazing sights, and it kind of makes up for there being nothing to do here. But in my opinion, nothing here holds a candle to the cabin. The cabin is exactly what it sounds like. A log cabin with no running water, a well, and a creek adjacent. The only modern asset of it is the electricity that was added back in the 1930s. It is an hour away from my hometown, and if you die up there, there is no chance you will ever be found. So it is my favorite place to go. It was great when I was stressed from high school and just needed to get away, and now that I am 25, it is my favorite place to unwind after a long week. But it has its quirks. I am going to start with the most normal of the stories. Not normal because this stuff happens all the time, but because there was no paranormal, extraterrestrial, ooga booga stuff involved. I was 13 at my sister's birthday party. My sister and I always celebrate our birthdays up there. My dad had to leave to take my sister's friends who could not sleep over back to their homes. My mom does not like to spend the night up there, so she left before the sun went down as well. This left 13-year-old me with about 5, 10 to 11-year-old girls. In short, I was miserable. I was poking at the fire planning on dropping some scary stories, so that they would have nightmares when I heard a distinct rustling noise coming from the dry creek just ahead of us. I looked up from the fire and saw a figure approaching us. I told my sister to quietly get back to the cabin. She looked at me and she was about to say why, when she saw that my eyes were fixated on a singular point. She followed my gaze, and not long after seeing an old, bearded, wide-eyed man stumbling towards us, she screamed, prompting her friends to scream, and they all ran back to the cabin. The screaming stunned me, as I was sure that this man would now proceed to kill me, and after he was done march to the cabin and finish off the girls. But that did not happen. He stopped and just started mumbling. I could only make out a few words: deer, rope, crick, and razor blades. Eventually I gathered up the courage to tell him off. I let him know that there were guns in the cabin, and if he did not leave, I would go get one. After I said this, I began backing towards the cabin and eventually retreated inside. We told my dad when he got back what happened, and he wasted no time gathering up people from the surrounding community. The guy was eventually caught, but not by police. He was caught by his daughter, who thanked my dad and I. I was not there for that. I guess this guy was just an incredibly old man with dementia who wandered out of his cabin and followed the road to ours, thinking it was one of the cutoffs of the creek. As for the razor blades, back in the 70s, a group of rednecks got tired of city people swimming in their creek. So, on one of the rope swings, they attached razor blades. A bunch of kids cut their hands up and the rednecks were never caught, and all they managed to do was get the rope swing cut down from the creek. Ultimately, I feel sadder than scared when I remember this. However, this is only the first story I have from there. The next one happened when I was 19 years old. My first long-term relationship had just ended, and to say I was taking it hard would be an understatement. Fortunately, my childhood friend, who I will call Josh, was coming back to South Dakota from basic training. This was also around my birthday, so I had already gotten some days off from work. There ended up being a ton of people who came out. In fact, there was no room for me to sleep inside the cabin. That was not an issue for me though, as at the time I drove a Subaru hatchback and I had no qualms about sleeping in my car. I had a whole system. I blew up an air mattress, put down the back seats, slid it in, and I was off to the races. The air mattress took up the entirety of my back seat and trunk, leaving no room for me to put my clothes anywhere. So I grabbed some hangers from the cabin. When it was time to go to bed, I hung up my clothes on the side. I kept the door open because I like the night air while I sleep. The weight and warmth of the blankets, mixing with the general feeling of chill that came from the mountain night air, was very relaxing. I was even happier when it started to rain. However, that night I woke up with a strange feeling just kind of looming around me. I sat up and got a little disappointed at how deflated the air mattress had gotten. Before I started to hear the soft squishing noises of bare feet in mud and grass. I looked out the windows to see who was coming to scare me. I was naturally irritated and called out, saying something to the effect of, "Get out of here, I hear you." But no one made their presence known. I bit the bullet and threw the covers from me, hopping out of the car in the pouring rain. I looked around my car and did not see anyone. I was super confused and a little bit scared, but I decided it was a good idea just to go back to sleep. As I wrapped myself back up, I began drifting off to the sound of raindrops tapping the roof of my car. And then, when I was about to go back to sleep, there was a loud thump that ripped me awake and sent me flying back up. It sounded as though someone had just slammed the back window of my car, and thus I did not sleep that night at all. When the sun started to come up, I donned my clothes, which were somehow still dry, and began to search the surroundings. Sure enough, there were footprints around my car and a single handprint on the back window. I thought about letting the group know, but I decided against it as they probably would not believe me even if I showed them the evidence. But also, because I did not want to ruin the weekend. The only one I tell is Josh, who also said it was a good idea not to tell anyone. He is a very spiritual person, and believed then, as he does now, that it was a ghost. I have a few other stories, but this is already way too long, so I will just end it on the most recent happening up there. Due to financial irresponsibility that is 100% on me, I now live with my parents again, at the age of 25. As such, I have been helping out where I can, doing the shopping, mowing the lawn, and taking the dogs out. But recently, my dad and I have started renovating the cabin at the beginning of the summer. We fixed the road, which had collapsed in the 80s, and we have been driving around for years on end, and fixed up the well so that it pumps water now. We finished the good renovations yesterday, actually. Some family friends came up after all the renovations, and we all had a good time. Beers were had and the cabin was full of laughter. Around 3 o'clock, I packed up my stuff and left for home. After a few hours, my mom got back from work and told me she was heading up to the cabin with my dad and the family friends. I assumed they would be gone for a couple of hours at most, but by 9 I figured they were just spending the night up there. My mom still does not like doing that, but will do so to make my dad happy. But at 11 I heard the heavy front door shut. When I came out of my room, I saw them both walking in like something bad had happened. I said I thought they were spending the night, and my mom said no very quickly. My dad asked for help tomorrow to help him fix up his car, which apparently quit on him up there. Then he said, "After that, we'll go for a hike and find out what that god-awful noise was." He said it sounded like a horse violently dying, and my mom backed him up. Apparently, everyone up there heard it, and the festivities stopped shortly after. Unfortunately, I am busy today using my free time to type this out, so I cannot go up there to help him. But honestly, after all the stuff that has happened, the two things I wrote about here, a strange sound like a horse violently dying does not shock me in the least. I love that cabin. I always will. But there is something in the hills that could very well be dangerous. When night falls up there, your best bet is to leave.